Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. Today's podcast is about making Halloween costumes from recycled materials. But before we jump into that topic, I want to share a big announcement, which is that Trashmagination now has the shark anatomy model pattern available. You'll remember from a few episodes ago, I talked about my shark anatomy model that I had made from recycled materials. Well, now you can buy the finished model or you can buy a PDF of the pattern to make your own. And you can see both of those when you click the shop link at trashmagination.com. So if you want to make a trash anatomy model as a holiday gift for the big shark aficionado in your life, now is the time to get started. So let's switch gears and talk about Halloween costumes from recycled materials. This is a special topic because Trashmagination began with Halloween costumes. At my previous workplace, there was an annual costume contest where you could win a day off with pay. I wanted my costume to stand out, and I decided that a costume made from recycled materials would show extra creativity. And most years, I won the contest. I learned a lot about making Halloween costumes from recycled materials. So today, I'll walk through my costumes and share what I learned so you can apply those lessons when you make your costumes from recycled materials. The first time I made a Halloween costume from recycled materials was in 2002. My workplace had introduced Keurig coffee makers, and I was concerned about the plastic cup dispensers. I went around my workplace gathering up the cups from the coffee makers, and I would bring them home, and I would take a knife to remove the foil, and I would put the coffee grounds in my compost. So then I would clean the cups, and I had this small collection of black and white Keurig cups in a box. So I decided to make my Halloween costume from them, and I safety pinned the clean cups onto the stuffed arms of 4 gray sweatshirts. I put these over my head and I became an octopus. The lesson from this costume is that it's really great if you can make your costume easy to deconstruct after Halloween. In this case, I pinned the cups on my pre-existing sweatshirts rather than gluing them to a brand new one, so I could easily unpin those cups and the shirts were just as good as before. I didn't need to go buy new shirts or go to the thrift shop and buy secondhand shirts, and I also didn't have to have an octopus costume forever because I had glued the cups onto the shirts. You can avoid buying new clothing for Halloween costumes if you use your current clothing and just attach the costume components in a way that doesn't destroy the clothing. The next costume that I designed was in 2003, and it was an armadillo made from the metal lids from frozen orange juice. I punched holes in the lids and I attached them to each other with twist ties, and that made kind of like the back armature of the armadillo, and it looked sort of like a Superman cape all made out of metal lids. And then I made the armadillo's head from a milk jug, which I formed using papier-mâché to give it shape. The lesson I want to emphasize from this costume is that you can get your costume ideas by looking at what trash you already generate. In this case, my family drank frozen orange juice, and I was saving the metal lids from that packaging because it seemed like something that could be used in craft projects, and it wasn't clear I could put it in the recycling bin. I saw that these little lids looked somewhat like armor when they were put together, and that generated the armadillo idea. The next Halloween costume in 2004 was a Razor's Edge database. Now, Razor's Edge is a software that many large nonprofit organizations use to keep track of constituent information. To dress up as a database, I stuck a bunch of used name tags all over myself with pretend data inside each one. The lesson from this costume is to pay attention when people are throwing things away at your office, school, or any organization. In this case, a big box of name tags was headed to the trash after an event. I intercepted that box and it became my costume. Over time, my colleagues learned to check with me when they were throwing items away to see if I had suggestions for how to use it. Another lesson from this costume is that if you can think about something in your workplace that causes a lot of stress for people and you dress up like that, that might be the scariest Halloween costume of all. My next costume from recycled materials was a spider web in 2005. It was made from 6-pack rings attached with twist ties. It stuck out from my neck in a big circle that I had built from bendy tent poles. On the web were flies made from black Keurig cups. You can see they keep coming back, costume after costume. I also made a spider costume for my daughter by sewing long tubes of fabric scraps on a black t-shirt. The lesson from this costume is to think about your Halloween costume long before Halloween so you can gather enough materials. For this costume, I was in the cafeteria at my workplace, and I saw that the cashier was collecting 6-pack rings as she would stock the shelves with drinks. She would then cut them up to ensure that they did not choke wildlife when they were thrown away. When I looked at the box of rings, I thought how they would look if they were all joined together, and that caused me to think of the spider web costume idea. Luckily, this was a few months before Halloween, so I asked her if I could have all the 6-pack rings going forward, and she was happy to do that because it saved her cutting them. Another lesson from this costume is that sometimes you can have more fun with Halloween costumes if you make them really big. Now, kids' costumes need to be more practical because they're going to go trick-or-treating. But in the case of adult costumes, and the ones that, especially that you're going to wear to a costume contest, it doesn't have to be that practical. You're only going to wear it for maybe like an hour. And so if you make something really big, it stands out. When I was designing this spiderweb costume, I had in mind those incredible Trinidadian costumes that are worn in parades during Carnival. I don't think my spiderweb costume is quite that big, but that was the inspiration behind it. And the tent poles provided a light and flexible infrastructure to build on. The next Halloween costume from recycled materials that I made in 2007 was renewable energy. I made a pretend solar panel using the same metal lids that I had from the armadillo costume. I made a wind turbine that was all from cardboard and was attached to my bike helmet. And then I had geothermal pipes running down my legs, which were really the tent poles from my spiderweb costume. The lesson from this costume is that you can recycle old Halloween costumes into new ones. In this case, pretty much every component had come from another Halloween costume, and it meant that this costume came together very quickly, which helped because I had 2 children under the age of 3 at the time. The next costume I made out of recycled materials was a zebra costume. Once again, those disposable Keurig cups made an appearance. I pinned hundreds of black and white cups all over some clothing that I already had, and I took the zebra head from the armadillo costume and painted black and white stripes on it. The lesson from this costume is that a Halloween costume can be abstract and still work. People knew I was a zebra even though I did not have black and white stripes clearly painted on my clothing. The lines of black and white cups combined with the zebra head made for a more humorous costume. Plus, the cups made a satisfying clip-clop sound when I would walk. I had to remember not to put any on my backside or I wouldn't have been able to sit down. The next costume I made from recycled materials was a snowstorm in 2009. For this costume, I cut a whole bunch of snowflakes with an X-Acto knife from yogurt container lids, and my hat was a swirl of cardboard painted light blue with cotton batting for trim. The lesson from this costume is to use the recycled material that is easiest to manipulate and which is clearly recycled. If I had made my snowflakes from paper and cardboard, it would have gone much faster. Cutting yogurt lids took forever, and so I had fewer snowflakes and my costume looked less impressive. Also, the audience could not tell that they were plastic lids, so the surprise factor was not there. The next year, my costume was the double rainbow. So in 2010, there was a viral video of a guy who was oohing and awing about a double rainbow. It had 44 million views. Here's some audio from that.
Whoa, that's a full rainbow all the way. Double rainbow. Oh my God. It's a double rainbow all the way. Whoa, that's so intense.
I made an MP3 of the audio and I played it on a small audio device. My rainbows were cut from a very large cardboard box and painted and decorated with plastic lids. And I sewed some straps so I could wear these rainbows like a backpack. The lesson from this costume is to connect your costume with something happening in the news or on social media. If I made this costume today, it would have no impact because everyone has forgotten this video. But back in 2010, this costume got a big laugh. This is also a great example of that go big lesson because the rainbows were like huge wings sticking out of my back. Finally, the rainbow had colorful plastic caps stuck on the rainbow stripes, which made the costume much more interesting than if it was just cardboard. My next costume from recycled materials in 2011 was the 4 Seasons. To make this costume, I found 4 sturdy branches and I attached them to a backpack I had made out of wood. I then covered the branches with packing paper and added seasonal decorations. For spring, I made yogurt flowers from pink yogurt flat packaging. For summer, I took some green packaging from dried fruit and I made leaves. For fall, I made leaves out of Cheeto bags, and in the winter, I had cotton batting for snow. This costume did not win the contest, and I think that's because it wasn't visually big or impressive, and it wasn't tied to a current event, and the recycled materials were somewhat subtle. It was actually kind of pretty. So, in fact, I didn't listen to my own lessons for designing recycled costumes when I made it. The next year, my costume in 2012 was a green roof. So a month before Halloween, I had the honor of visiting PS 41, an elementary school in New York City that had worked super hard to get a green roof installed. And I was so inspired that I wanted to make a Halloween costume of it. The top of the school in my costume was a piece of thick cardboard with a hole cut out for my head. The green fabric for the roof had come from an old tent that my son had destroyed playing with it. And then I sewed the 4 walls of the school hanging down using recycled plastic bags for the windows and a pair of my husband's old dress pants for the walls. The plants growing out of the roof were made from chocolate wrappers that just happened to be green, which were stuck on twist ties and then jabbed into the cardboard. I later donated this costume to a company in Maryland that builds green roofs called Uptop Acres. This costume is a great example of the go big lesson, and it was fun to wear because people are quite interested in green roofs. My last costume that I made from recycled materials was Atlas the Titan. This character, if you're not familiar with it, was punished by Zeus to carry the weight of the world on his back. I made my costume by building a giant globe from plastic caps. So I had this vision of making a sphere from plastic caps, and it just lent itself to being this character of Atlas the Titan. I had visions that the caps would just form a nice sphere if they were all attached together, but unfortunately they did not. And I had to stuff the globe with plastic bags to make it round. Also, this project took a very long time because I was hand drilling holes in the caps with my hand drill and connecting them with twist ties. One lesson from this costume is that there are a lot more mythological characters than we typically see at Halloween. For inspiration on this topic, I recommend a costume contest called Take Back Halloween, which is about costumes showing strong women. At this point, I stopped making costumes for myself because I started my own company and I work as a solopreneur, so I don't have my own costume contest for myself. Also, at that point, Trashmagination had started to evolve and include far more than Halloween costumes. I am so grateful that these Halloween costume contests inspired me to make Trashmagination. They provided a deadline and a motivation and caused me to keep working even when I had very small children. I have made costumes for my kids over the years. However, not many of their costumes involve the creative reuse of trash. They chose what they wanted to wear, and often they had a vision that involved purchasing costume components. The costumes that I did make for them included a fox, a raccoon, a bat, and Thomas the Train. Those were all sewing projects with fabric from my fabric stash. In the case of the bat, I did take the fabric from a broken umbrella to make the bat wings, although I took out the metal and plastic components because they were sort of pokey and dangerous. Through all these Halloweens, my husband always helped me make my costumes. A few years ago, he made my son's costume, which was a Pac-Man arcade game. My son loved this costume, but unfortunately, it was not fun to wear because other kids would run up to him and grab the joystick or punch the buttons. Hopefully, hearing about my costumes inspired you to create your own. I recommend Pinterest for ideas, but here's a tip if you're making a costume from recycled materials. Search based on the material you want to recycle. So, for example, you might search on Halloween costumes from cardboard or Halloween costumes from milk jugs, and you'll get lots of ideas. If you do make a costume from recycled materials, you could enter it in an annual green Halloween costume contest, which is hosted by Inhabitat, and I'll link to that from the podcast. Most of the entries in the past years were handmade, but not necessarily made from trash. So you could get inspiration, but you go all the way and make something from recycled materials. Thanks so much for listening. I will post photos of my costumes up on the blog and on social media so you can check them out. And please drop me a note at trashmagination@gmail.com and tell me about the Halloween costumes that you have made from recycled materials. Consider leaving a review on iTunes if this podcast inspired you to have a green Halloween. There is more to Halloween than costumes. I just designed a Halloween wreath that I made from black socks with holes in them, and there's pictures of that posted on my Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, may you see trash as just another source of Halloween costumes in your life.